I suggest that our calling is to be ready and available for the Lord who is always coming. And this applies not only to our personal lives, but also society at large. The way we can be sure we are ready for the final day is to make sure we're ready to face him in all the interim days, whenever they come upon us. In biblical terms, there are many days of the Lord. But let's go further and ask, is there in our experience an earthly reality to which the visions and prophecies about the Antichrist are pointing? It's part of our fallenness as human beings that we tend to make ourselves the centre of things and to go our own way. The pride that underlies these tendencies is seen in the Bible as the desire to be as God. Therefore, put any of us in a position of power and certain dangers emerge. We're all familiar with the saying, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Well, that points to the Antichrist. However, no individual can become absolutely powerful and be as God without the support of a whole system. History has given us many examples of such systems where very powerful personalities have used their power in horrific ways. The Jews knew of Egypt, Assyria, and Babylon, and we've already noted the power of Rome and its emperors, who incidentally said that they were God. I'm getting there, brother. I'm nearly there. However, to gain absolute power, it is necessary to control people and to keep them happy, or at least compliant. Rome offered the distractions of the games, but it also used brute force to coerce and instill fear. Hitler is probably the first person in modern times to use propaganda to control people's thinking. And he would have said that a lie which is repeated often enough is soon accepted as truth. This is where the issue of deception and the lie are irrelevant in the Antichrist myth. Sadly, most modern systems of tyranny also have built in an alliance between state and religion. We witnessed this in the apartheid days in our own country, and it's very evident in the international struggle that's going on at present. Significantly, however, there was a time when the Holy Roman Empire, religion, became the power, and then it used the state for its own purposes. Not surprisingly, it was then the popes who became corrupt, many of them. So we must beware of thinking that religion is immune from the things that we are describing. I do think, like my brother has said, that we're living in a moment of crisis, and that things like pollution of the environment, global warming, climate change, HIV and AIDS, widespread terrorism and violence, drug abuse, overpopulation, greed, the growing sense of economic uncertainty, together with a general decline in faith and morals, all suggest that we are now in one of those days when the ultimate issues of good and evil are at stake. Certainly through globalization, technology, the power of the media and the current economic system, there's more opportunity to become absolutely powerful. But does this mean that we are at the end of things and that they're now upon us? I would be hesitant to say so. I think that we may be facing a day of the Lord, but not necessarily the last day. The end is not just the end of the story, it's the whole point of the story. It's the moment when everything falls into place, when truth is known at last, when evil and sin are seen to be finally vanquished, and when all of life is seen to have had meaning. Supremely, it's the moment when God is manifested in all his glory and majesty. No wonder the early Christians would often cry out, Maranatha, come, Lord, come. In order to keep this short, I've not actually spoken about the modern state of Israel, because I do not believe it is a sign of the times. So you can query that when we go into debate. You will also notice that I've been careful to speak about the end of all things and not the end of the world, because I don't think they're the same thing. There is a difference, and therefore we need to ask, what is it in modern cosmology that has relevance to the debate that we're having tonight? Thank you. We may be living in a day of the Lord and not necessarily the last day. See, I'm working from the perspective that there be many days of the Lord. And I want to come to it, that question, in the bigger way of asking about cosmology. Where does what we're talking about in this world, which is a very small planet in an enormous universe, where does that fit in to what we speak about? Because we're not really talking about the end of the world, we're talking about the end of all things.
Well, I did make a distinction between the end of history and the end of the world. A very clear distinction between the two, and suggest that the historical process was one which witnessed a continuous rivalry between truth and falsehood, and that the historical process cannot end without the final conclusive triumph of truth over falsehood. We believe that moment will come, that decisive moment would come, as the Quran says, with Jesus, with the return of the Son of Mary, who is the true Messiah. And that when he returns, he's going to rule the world. This is cosmology impacting on politics. He's going to rule the world. He's going to rule the world with justice, which will replace the injustice which will precede it. And that his rule would be from the Holy Land. He was taken up from the Holy Land, and while there is a statement of the Prophet, Allah's blessings be upon him, that when he returns, he will return in Damascus. I have confessed to my audience here in Cape Town that I have a problem with that. It's not that I'm rejecting the hadith or the word of the Prophet, but I have a problem. I noticed that when the spiritual journey, the nocturnal ascent of the Prophet Muhammad, Allah's blessings be upon him, he was in Mecca, and he was taken by night from Mecca to Jerusalem, and from Jerusalem he ascended through the different worlds of space and time, and then came back down in Jerusalem. And if Jesus was raised from Jerusalem, it seems to me that there's some logical consistency that he should return to Jerusalem. I believe that's the Christian view.
Well, I'm not sure, because you see, I think again we're using symbolism and imagery to describe what's indescribable. Some of the imagery implies that every eye will see him. Now, what one has to conceive of within our present space-time understanding is how do people in South Africa and people in Australia see him at the same time? It seems to me that we're looking here at an event that transcends time and history. And therefore, in one sense, I don't know what it will be like. You see, I think that when we're talking about the end times, and we tend to be catastrophic, by the way, in the way we describe these. I have problems with that, but we do tend to put all the negatives about what's going on in the world. And you can have people who say, well, we could end up blowing the whole thing up with nuclear explosion, in which case there's nothing for Jesus to return to rule over anyway. But is that kind of end, one that we bring about, the same thing as we mean by the end of all things? That's one thing. If we were to have nuclear war and wipe out light on this planet, would that compel Jesus to return? You see what I mean? I think that there is a difference between our events and what we're describing. And that most of the imagery of the Bible turns the return of Christ into a supernatural event, which then transcends history. I mean, for example, you talk about Christ coming to reign. There is part of the Christian myth is what's called the millennium, the return and reigning for 1,000 years. But I think that's been discarded by the church, generally speaking. It's been resurrected by some sick Christian, more way out Christians, but on the whole, most Christian in the rank and file of the church would not accept that. And I think in any case, it's a Jewish belief, which I could explain if I'm given more than 4 minutes, but I think I should let my question ride for the moment. I just have a problem with linking space and time, Jesus returning in Jerusalem, in a context in which we're looking at an event where everybody will be caught up and every eye see him.
But let me enter into the record something for my own safety. If you see me yawning, it's not because of boredom. It's because I left my home at the end of February last year. Mm-hmm. And I've been traveling ever since. Yes. I have to be guided by what the Prophet said, because he is a prophet, Allah's blessings be upon him, and by the book, the Quran. And our audience here would be more interested in knowing what does the Quran say, what does the Prophet say, rather than what this West Indian, after the West Indians have been thoroughly defeated, what does this Trinidadian have to say? But we're coming after you, don't worry, we're coming after you. He said that when Jesus returns, it is going to be a specific event in political history, namely that he would be Hakim, one who rules, and he would be Hakimun Adil, one who would rule with justice from the Holy Land. In order for us to understand the concept of the return of Jesus, alayhi salam, I think we have to focus on the Antichrist. And from the time we focus on the Antichrist, we come face to face with the problem that I am hoping that you will direct some attention to. How do you deal with religious symbolism? He said about the Antichrist that he would ride on a donkey, that the donkey will travel as fast as the clouds, and the donkey will have his ears stretched out wide. We have one school of thought which declares that we have to accept this statement literally. One school of our scholarship. And therefore, that we have to wait for the flying donkey. You see? And they're laughing. So they're going to accuse me of humiliating them because this audience is laughing. And then there's another school which says, no, this is religious symbolism. Like the sun and the moon and 11 stars. And when God speaks and he sends a message, sometimes he sends it coded. And the secular think tanks who have no faith in the heart, who judge progress by the height of a building and not by what is in the heart, who say men can be bought and sold, you just need enough rands to buy them, and who cannot conceive that there's a man who cannot be bought with all the rands in the world. He's not up for sale because he has something called integrity. That when he sends down his message in a coded form, it's only his servants who would understand. And when they will see with light, which is not sold either in Washington or in London or in Baghdad. Or can't buy it, not even in the stock market. Light. Yesterday, Jewish scholarship produced Jewish mystics, great men. Yesterday, Christian scholarship produced Christian mystics, great men. Hindu scholarship did the same. And we had our share of Muslims who pursued the spiritual path. Today we live in an age of darkness, where religion is now reduced to conferences and seminars and research papers. And the wisdom of the past, with men who saw with the divine light, seems to be going away. We say that the donkey is already here. We say the donkey is the modern aircraft, and that donkey is polluting a lot of the atmosphere up there, I've been told. So a problem of interpretation of religious symbolism we have in our community at the moment. And secondly, to focus attention on understanding the return of the true Messiah, you have to understand the false Messiah. He has to rule from Jerusalem.
He's ruling from over there as well, actually.
He has to rule from Jerusalem. Now, I've been saying to my audiences, if the Holy Land was liberated by a British army in November 1917, and that was just a chance military event, it happened by chance. If British rule over the Holy Land from 1918 to 1948 was just by chance. If the return of the Israelite people to the Holy Land 2,000 years after they had been expelled, and 2,000 years after they had been prohibited to return and they're back, to reclaim it as their own, if this is also by chance, if the birth of a state of Israel in 1948 in the Holy Land is also by chance, and if the growth of Israel to such a state of power that Israel appears to me, and of course only God doesn't make mistakes, Bishop, appears to me to be poised to take over from the United States very soon as the ruling state in the world. If all of these things can happen by chance, then, Bishop, the cow can also jump over the moon. I therefore plead, if these things are not happening by accident, if there is an explanation, what is the explanation? Mine is that this is the movement towards the culmination when the Antichrist, or the false Messiah, will rule the world from Jerusalem and declare, I am the Messiah. And when he is accepted as the Messiah, he'll rub his hands and say, mission accomplished. I deceived them. And so, not all Muslims share my view. I've written a book entitled Jerusalem in the Quran, in which I'm attempting now to explain an interpretation of the word of the Prophet, Allah's blessings be upon him, concerning these events which are taking place now in the world, concrete events which cry out for an explanation. Is the methodology that I'm using, the interpretation of religious symbolism, an accepted methodology? This debate is now taking place in our camp, but we're dying to hear from you.
Of
how do you deal with religious symbolism, particularly in the context of the end times?
Well, I think I have actually mentioned, I've already dealt with it to some degree in what I said, but what I wanted to pick up with you was the understanding of how you interpret symbolism. Because it seems to me that one's coming at it always with a book and then saying, well, the book is what enables me to interpret. Now, at one level, I agree with you. We both work with different books. But there is another sense, and that is what I would call the prophetic instinct. When you're reading Isaiah and Jeremiah and all the prophets of old, they watched events happening and they interpreted them. But the interpretation was not of predetermined. It wasn't determinism. It was seeing forces at work in which good and evil, when Israel chose to be unjust, then the prophet would say, if you go that way, it will lead to loss of life and destruction. You will be able to go to exile, you will lose the land, or whatever it was. If you return to God, the events will change. So it was not determined, it was always open-ended, but around an instinctive, prophetic instinct that listened to God and said, if we walk in God's way, this is how it will work. If we go another way, this is how it's going to work. Now, that's how I would come at modern events. Not to just simply say, well, here, I'm using now the Bible. I mean, there are those Christians who believe that the way you work out a doctrine about the end times is to simply put a whole lot of text together and then draw up a map for the future. Now, I think many scholars, and I don't class myself as a scholar, but I would agree with them, that is not the way the Bible is meant to be interpreted. I don't think that we're working with prediction. I don't think we're working with determinism. I think we're working with the kind of things that God gives us, the tools where we can listen, we would say, to the Spirit. And when you listen to the Spirit, then you hear what God's saying and where it's actually going to go. So I would be hesitant. I would say Christians are not people of the book. And that doesn't mean that the Bible for us isn't important. I mean, mine gets worn out. I use it so much. But although I use Scripture a lot, it's not the Bible I believe in. It's the one to whom the Bible points. In other words, for me, Christ is the Word of God. Christ is the living Word that I respond to. And the Bible, it only bears witness to Him. Now, when you're working with a living person and not with a book, then there's a whole open-endedness. I mean, I could not describe my wife in a book. I could say everything I want to say about her, but when I finished, I haven't described her. Because you can never describe a person like that. It's something open, something bigger. Now, Christ is like that. And I think that when you're working with words, which is what we have when we have a book, we have a problem of limitation. We have a problem of interpreting. We have a problem of language changing its meaning, and so on. So I don't know whether that answers your question. It's probably used up our time. But
you're lucky. You have your wife here. And you are lucky that my wife is not here. because she was Christian. Her name was Angela. We met in New York. She became Muslim. We got married. But she sleeps with the Bible next to her. And whenever we have a quarrel, she starts singing hymns. So when she starts to sing a hymn, I know it's trouble for me. She became a Muslim, and she's a better Muslim than I am today. Yes. A wonderful wife. But she's passionately, spiritually bonded to the Bible. And for you to say Christians are people without a book, you're lucky she's not here. But I agree with you. That if you are imprisoned with the word and you want to put the words together to form a map, you can be misguided and mistaken. I agree with you entirely because our Prophet Allah's blessings be upon him, has described the world of the Antichrist as one in which appearance and reality are completely opposite to each other. And he said, beware of the last age, because there will be great liars, people telling monstrous lies, so that appearance and reality are opposite to each other. Things are not what they appear to be. And he had a prayer, a lovely prayer. He said, "O Allah, show me things as they are," in parentheses, that I might not be deceived by what they appear to be. Excuse me. And hence, it is not the external form of the words, but the internal reality. And we need, therefore, an epistemology to deal with an age of awesome deception. The Quran speaks with almost the same words as the Bible. If I'm wrong, you can correct me. The Quran says that there are people who have eyes and yet they do not see. He's shaking his head already. It's there in the Bible. They have ears and yet they do not hear. They have hearts and yet they do not understand. And such people are just like cattle. Even with a PhD from MIT. Yes. They're just like cattle. Rather, they're more misguided than cattle. When it speaks of a people who have eyes and yet they cannot see, it says, it's not these eyes we're talking about. It's this eye, the internal eye. And now comes this very famous statement concerning the Antichrist, about which we are still fighting in Islam. He said, every prophet has warned his people about the Antichrist. Well, in English, in Arabic, it's Dajjal. So let them become accustomed to the terminology now. Every prophet has warned his people about Dajjal. And the prophet Noah warned his people about Dajjal. But I'm going to tell you something that no one ever said before me. Dajjal sees with his left eye. He's blind in the right eye. It looks like a bulging grape. But your Lord is not one eye. Between his eyes on his forehead is written, disbeliever. And every believer will be able to see it, whether he is literate or illiterate. We have people who are waiting for a one-eyed man. It was Nelson, Lord Nelson. It wasn't Nelson.
Don't blame him on me.
It wasn't Moshe Dayan. Moshe Dayan was a great general. Because they interpret it literally. We on this side of the fence in Islam, who recognize this as religious symbolism, we say no, this is an epistemological problem. The left eye symbolizes external sight and therefore knowledge externally acquired. The blind right eye symbolizes internal blindness and therefore an incapacity to receive knowledge internally.
5 minutes.
Time up.
5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay. Very generous. And knowledge externally acquired is absolutely important. A very keen observation of events unfolding in politics, in economics, in monetary economics, the the irreversible meltdown of the US dollar that we've been anticipating for years now. A keen observation and an effort to understand with the external eye events unfolding in politics and economics is absolutely important. But there is also the necessity for internal, intuitive, spiritual insight to go beyond the external word to reach its internal substance. And that is where we are having our debate now in Islam. And I'm at the center of that debate. That you cannot understand the world today unless and until you recognize that appearance and reality on all things connected with the Antichrist are opposite to each other. And unless and until you see with the internal eye in addition to the external sight, you'll be deceived and misguided. You will not be able to understand and interpret the world today. This is a debate from our side, and we agree with you that looking at the words and putting the words together and forming a map, you can be wrong. We agree with you, yes.
Is there a question you want to ask me?
If the events that have been unfolding in the Holy Land that I have described earlier are not happening randomly, by chance, in which case, of course, the cow can jump over the moon. If there is an explanation for what is unfolding in the Holy Land, it will be something of vital importance for everyone here present tonight. And it is such a sad thing that I'm not seeing more African faces here tonight. I don't know Cape Town, what explanation you have for that. Of vital importance, because if we understand what has so far unfolded, we can anticipate what is to come, and we can interpret what is to come. And we who belong to the religious way of life would want to maintain integrity, would want to have eyes with which to recognize oppression, and you were part of the struggle, as you told me, in this country against oppression. Because oppression